In today's example, we're going to be talking about time-based SQL injections. In the previous example, when we injected SQL code that resulted in a false, the page changed. So even though we didn't see any errors on the page still acted differently depending on the input that we were passing to it. Now, in this example, the page will always look the same. Nothing will change about the page. Let me show you a quick example. So I have the page loaded in here. And if let's just click on any post, and as usual, you want to test everything, test every argument, same stuff that we always say, but we're going to turn on our interceptor and let's load the page. And similar to what we did this time, I'm not going to waste your time and test everything. I know that the vulnerable input is the tracking ID in here in the request cookies. So what we did in the previous example was we put a single quote and and 1 is equal to 0, like a false statement. And then if we did that and hit enter and forwarded it, the page loaded differently. In here, we were able to see other extra stuff. When the statement is false, that stuff disappears when the statement is true. So the page loaded differently depending on what we were sending to it. But you could do this in your own time as well. I don't want to waste your time. If you played with this page in here, so we're just going to hit enter. And if you play with this input, send it all kinds of stuff, it will always load the same. The page will always load exactly the same. You will never see anything changing within the page that will indicate that this page is vulnerable to an SQL injection. Therefore, in that case, as you know, when it comes to hacking, there is a lot of trial and error. So you're just going to have to try a certain payload to see, as a kind of a last resort kind of payload to see if it's vulnerable to a blind time-based SQL injection. Because we're not able to see any changes on the page when we send it any kind of input, even if we are actually exploiting an SQL injection and executing SQL code in the database, we're not able to see anything on the page that will tell us, yes, we're actually able to manipulate this page. There is no indication at all. Because of that, we can send an SQL command or query to the database engine and simply tell it to wait. Tell it to wait for 10 seconds or sleep for 10 seconds. And therefore, if we notice that the page is loading slower than usual, then we know, okay, maybe the page is actually executing SQL statements, but it's just simply not returning the results in here, or it's returning the results somewhere else that we're not able to see. But that's all fine. The main thing is we're still able to execute SQL statements on the database, and therefore from there we'll be able to figure out a lot of stuff, and I'll show you later. But now the first stage is we want to discover, we're assuming we don't know anything in here. We tried everything, we tried all kinds of injections, the page is always loading the same. Then the only thing we can try is maybe it's vulnerable to a blind SQL injection. Now, discovering and exploiting blind SQL injections will be different depending on the database engine, as you know. And as I said before, you can always rely on cheat sheets because they teach you how to execute different SQL statements and exploit different SQL injections based on the database engine. Now, if you don't know what a database engine is, then please go back and revise the introduction lecture to SQL injections because I explained what I mean by that. So right here, I have a cheat sheet. Now you can look on Google for other cheat sheets. Pretty much same information is there usually. And as you can see, for every certain statement, we have a number of versions. So you have a version for Oracle, for Microsoft, for MySQL, and for PostgreSQL. So it really depends on the database engine that you want to exploit. Now, obviously at this stage, we don't really know what database engine we have. So you will have to pretty much play with all of them. So the first thing we want to look at is how to concatenate two statements. So you can see for Oracle, you put the 2 bars. For Microsoft, you put a plus. PostgreSQL, 2 bars. And then for MySQL, it's normal spaces. You probably noticed this from previous lectures as well. We've done that. But what we're trying to do right now is discover a time-based blind SQL injection. So I'm just going to do Control F and look for time-based. And here we go, we have the time delays in here. So this is basically telling you which query you should send to the database engine to cause a time delay or to make it sleep or wait for a certain period of time. So as you can see for Oracle, this would be the statement. For Microsoft, you simply say wait for delay. For PostgreSQL, you say PG sleep. And for MySQL, you would just say sleep followed by the number of seconds that you wanted to sleep for. So You should, in a real life example, test all of these, but because I have already done this and because I already know and I don't want to waste your time, I know this web application in here, the target, is actually using a PostgreSQL database engine. And therefore, I'm going to go with the pg sleep statement. So all we're going to have to do in here is send it to the repeater. We have it in here now, and we want to inject it in the request cookies. And we have the request cookie in here. And what we're going to do is, because this is a PostgreSQL, we know that we have to put 2 bars to append to the statement. But before we can inject in here, we actually have to put a single quote to finish whatever statement that was there in the web application that was programmed by the programmer, similar to what we have been doing before. And then we're putting the 2 bars to append or concatenate another statement to the existing statement, because like we said, we have to always finish the existing statement before we can execute other statements. And what we want to do right now is simply tell the web application to sleep. So we're going to do pg_sleep for 10 seconds. And then, exactly like we were doing before, we do 2 dashes for PostgreSQL to comment the rest of the existing statement that was programmed by the programmer, by the web application developer. So we're adding a single quote to finish the existing statement. We're doing double bars to concatenate and add another statement to the existing statement. We're adding our statement in here, and then we're simply finishing all that off by adding 2 dashes to comment whatever code that might follow in the web application, that might follow this injection that we're injecting in here. So if the website waits for 10 seconds before loading, I know that I'm actually able to manipulate this website and execute SQL code or SQL queries. If it doesn't, it just loads using the normal delay time, then I know, okay, well, this is not vulnerable. I move on to the next input. So let's just hit enter and let's go ahead and send it. And as you can see, we're still waiting. So if you started counting now, it's actually taking a bit of time to load this website. And as you can see, it took a bit of time to load this website, which is an indication that it is probably executing my sleep in here, the sleep statement. So let's just double check this and let's actually tell it to wait for only 1 second. And let's see if the page loads quicker. So let's send. And boom, as you can see, the page loads much quicker, which means that when we're telling it to sleep for 1 second, it's actually sleeping for 1 second. And when I'm telling it to sleep for longer than that, it is sleeping for much longer than that. So that's an indication that we have a blind SQL injection, and we're going to be able to extract data from the database, or determine data, or guess data, if you want to say that, based on the time delays.